this little device up here, my students often refer to as Dr. Swivel. And he follows me around. It's the only person I can count on to follow me. And but it's a video recording of the lecture, so, or whatever that we're calling this. So it will be posted on my website, drmitch.com, soon. I don't know when. The webmaster always falls down on the job, but that's me, by the way. So, and for those of you who don't know how to spell my name, it's M-I-T-S-C-H. The S is silent. I had one student look at me. She said, "Have you always spelled it that way?" It's like, yeah. My driver's license says that. I guess I should be that. So, so there's that. And then Olivia mentioned the psych monologues. We can be found on any platform that you listen to podcasts on. I always use the royal we. You can hear me there. The podcast actually started as a means for me to talk to my seniors that were in the grief and loss class during lockdown. And once I got started on it, a lot of them encouraged me to continue on. And so I did. We're at episode 122. And I've been really shocked at the number of people that have tuned in. That's old radio talk, but have listened in. We're pushing almost 9,000 downloads now, so it's pretty amazing, the response. The other thing that excuse me, that's developing is a nonprofit I put together that came into existence in August, I believe, called Stained Glass International. And its overall mission was to equip and educate and empower the next generation of Christians. So the stuff that I talk about in the podcast is what I often say. I start out every one reminding people it's this intersection of faith and psychology and spiritual formation. And so the stuff I talk about in here that you've heard me say, I did one episode on the comfort of shame, and I did another one on the scandal of grace. And obviously they're shorter because I know people's attention span is about that of a hamster. So, but I'm currently, right now the schedule looks like I just finished doing one on forgiveness, and then this week's one's going to be on repentance, and then the following one is going to be on reconciliation. So I go into those really not only in terms of just relationship stuff, but trying to correct some distortions I think we carry around with us. And then after that, I'm going into a fairly long series about spiritual journey and what that looks like and the things to pay attention to in that. So we'll see how it goes. Listen in, and if you like it, then turn somebody else on. I guess that's how this works. And we'll go from there. So those are some resources. I do have a YouTube channel, and I put up a couple different. I have got a lot of videos up there. Actually, at one point in time, I did Psych 101 as a flipped classroom. That was a profound failure. But all the videos that I shot about 250 videos of short videos explaining concepts in psychology. And so, it's not like Khan Academy or anything like that, but it has a variety of resources in there that I've been doing this. You'd think I'm like bored or something, and it's like, no. My days, I don't know about yours, mine has 48 hours in it, doesn't yours? Yeah, well, my wife says I'm nuts too. So, okay, so let's talk about this, the scandal of grace. And those of you that are biblical scholars know the word scandal is often been referred to in the Greek, scandalon, or a stumbling block or a block of some sort. And I think it probably is even more true than it's ever been, really. because we carry around with us some pretty distorted ideas about grace. Like, the student that comes up to me, hasn't turned an assignment in and says, "Can I have some grace?" And it's like, no. You already got grace, so it's just turn in your dumb assignment. So, if you feel bad, it's all on you, dude. So, but David Siemens is a psychologist, taught out at Fuller and in Biola and at Rosemead. I wanted to show you this quote. I ran across it just getting ready for this, and it's very, very, very telling. And it goes this way, and I know you can read, but I'll read it to you. Many years ago, I was driven to the conclusion that the two major areas of most emotional problems among evangelical Christians are these: the failure to understand, receive, and live out God's grace and forgiveness, and the failure to give out that unconditional love, forgiveness, and grace to other people. And then he lands the plane very uncomfortably. We read, we hear, we believe a good theology of grace, but that's not the way we live. The good news of the gospel of grace has not penetrated the level of our emotions, which is really what we're talking about. A lot of it is. We dismiss our emotions, but then we get driven by our emotions. And that guy I was talking about that I mentioned that I was talking about a couple days ago that was going to the field, he was going to Indonesia, and I was saying, so how does this feel? And he had no words, literally no words. And I said, well, mad, sad, glad, bad, and if you're from Jersey, scad. And he said, oh, yeah, bad? Well, we're on a roll. We don't have a very differentiated vocabulary for our emotions either, and David Siemens points to that very fact. So, one of the things I want to highlight for you when we walk into this is two different things. Is Reformation versus transformation. Almost all of us probably can quote, Romans 12:1, don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed. And oftentimes the conformed, and I'm a word nerd enough, I pay attention to this stuff. Con is to be formed with. Transformed, the word actually in the Greek is the same word for metamorphosis. So literally changing its substance into something entirely different. Now, obviously, you get at the biological level, it's the same. But I think in a lot of cases, we add a step. And we go from, I'm not going to be conformed by this world, but I'll settle for reformation instead, reformed. And the thing about reformation is it takes personal effort, precision, measurement, and really all the same building materials, basically me, right? When it comes to transformation, think about the prefix, right? Conformed, transformed. And we have a lot of words, certainly in our lexicon today, right? Transgender, transportation, transcend. But it conveys the idea of a journey, moving from one place to another. Reformation is all about my effort, my ability, my precision, my drive, my achievement. But transformation takes time, it takes trust, and it takes freedom. So in a sense, it's out of our hands, but we're still called to participate and be a part of it. And something entirely new shows up as a result of that. And I think in a lot of ways we end up saying, yeah, that's great. Can we get there now? And that's why Reformation is so much more comfortable to us, because it defines our task very, very clearly. And we can do that. I can focus on this stuff. So, couple beginning kind of quotes for you. And this is from a mentor of mine. He said, "Justification by grace through faith is the theologian's learned phrase for what Chesterton once called the furious love of God." It's an interesting connection between those two things. Furious love of God. And another one, though lip service is paid to the gospel of grace, many Christians live as if only personal discipline and self-denial will mold the perfect me. The emphasis is on what I do rather than what God is doing. And Brennan was a mentor of mine. Another one is from Richard Niebuhr, great theologian. He says, "The great Christian revolutions come not by the discovery of something that was not known before. They happen when somebody takes radically something that was always there." I mean, Martin Luther didn't discover anything new. He discovered something that had been there all along, but then he took it at its word. Go figure, taking God's word at its word. So there's a variety of ways of kind of crafting this and framing this, like I said before, that goes into, let's be clear about what grace is. Like I said, we are really good at rhapsodizing about grace, but as that previous quote said, we're not real good at letting it penetrate how we relate to ourselves, how we relate to each other, and might I add, how we relate to God himself. So what I want to show you, how many of you guys went and saw Les Mis last night? Anybody in here? Oh, just a few, okay. Well, you're all heathen. I want to show you transformation. I want to show you this example. If you've ever seen Les Mis before, let the record show I am not a musical guy. I am not a musical guy, okay? Unfortunately for me, two of the most profound movies that I gravitate to are both musicals. Like, shoot me now. God, take me home. I let other people do the worshiping. I just cheer them on. So, but what I want to show you in this is three different scenes from Les Mis. And if you want to study in shame and grace, watch Les Mis. It's there. It's in the main characters, actually, if you look very closely, okay? So what I want to show you is the beginning, and then a response to grace, and then what does it look like lived out at a later point in time. And Lord willing, and the creek don't rise, the sound works. So we'll see how this goes. Turn off the lights. Wrong side. Oh, where's my sound? I'll come back to it, just hang on. Give me grace. Oh, come on, really? Maybe because of this thing. Yeah, it is. Okay. Now I'm going to have to explain it. I would send you all, actually, to the movie. And yes, it's a long movie. They did it actually live. So I won't bore you with something you can't hear. But in that first scene, Jean Valjean actually is taken in. And the priest, who in the actual book itself, the priest had been appointed. He wasn't really a priest. And so Jean Valjean is taken in. He is blessed for the food. And then what does he do? But he turns around and steals all the silver. Interesting detail is the silver. So he runs off in the middle of the night, takes all the silver, and anyway, and then he gets picked up by the gendarmes. He was in a prison camp, a work camp, and so he was forever condemned. He had this writ that said a condemned man. He was guilty, and he could never get a job. He couldn't get anywhere. And so he's picked up by the gendarmes. They're brought back into the priest, and they say, we found him with this stuff, and is this yours? And he says, yes, it is. And he said, I gave these to him. I gave these to him. And then he goes one step even further, and he walks over to the table, picks up 2 of the silver candelabras, the candlesticks, and gives them both and says, you forgot these 2. It was a really, really remarkable scene. And of course, Jean Valjean says, the world hates me, and I'm going to hate it back. And this man has bought my soul with silver. And that's basically what the priest says to him, is I give you this silver so that you can become a good man. And it's a profound example. In the scene that I just ran past, he's in a little chapel that's part of the cathedral where the priest is, and he's having an argument with God. And the argument with God is, the world has hated me, I'm going to hate it back, I'm going to do it one bit better, I'm just going to act like I'm not the person that it says I am, and I'm going to go forth and make the world a better place. And basically he does. And then we get to the end, which this is set in the French Revolution, and his daughter, well, not daughter, but adopted daughter, falls in love with this guy who's part of the revolution, and he goes and he actually saves him from the barricade where they're getting shot by the French army. And he saves him and walks through the sewers of Paris and everything else. And during that time, they capture the antagonist here, and that is Javert, who is an inspector that's all about law. Somebody's soul has been saved by grace, and another man that grew up in the prisons, and says law is all there is, and he's caught by the rebels. And they give him to Jean Valjean to say, do with him what you want. And Jean Valjean goes up, pulls his knife, and Javert's comment is, how appropriate that you would kill me with a knife. And Jean Valjean looks at him and says, I don't know what you're talking about. And there are 2 different voices at the end that are this, is the voice of shame. Jean Valjean looks at him and says, or I should say, Javert looks at Valjean and says, you will always be what you've always been. You are a thief. That's all you ever will be. Nothing else. And Jean Valjean looks back at him and says, there's nothing I desire. No bargains, no petitions, nothing. You are free. And it's such a lightning bolt for Javert that has grown up and been and enforced the law that he can't handle it. He just can't handle it. If you've never seen the movie, I won't ruin it for you. But it's dramatic because when we structure our lives around the law, as Paul says, we will die on that petard. We will die on that stake. because we can't always keep it. And again, you can say, no, I'm saved by grace, I got all that down, blah, blah, blah. But all the other little laws that we run around with in our head about how things should go, and that's the voice of shame. So, what is grace? The one thing I want to tell you, I am not going to try to answer this question theologically. We've got a whole school of theology. Go get them. But I want to focus on grace that's needed to live life differently. I want to push it into that level of our emotions and our relationships, and usually this is what the Bible calls sanctification, right? It's the process of change that goes into it. So, the one thing I would say to you to start out here is grace is the beginning of our healing because it offers us one thing we want the most. And that is to be accepted without regard whether we are acceptable. That's what makes it so powerful. And I might add, just to be honest, that's what scares us. Because we have equated acceptance with condoning and mediocrity. Versus acceptance, I can't change what I won't accept. I can't. I can tell you from watching lots and lots of people and doing it myself, if I don't accept what exists, what is actually there, it does not guarantee I won't go anywhere else. It says, well, it's kind of like on your map in Google Maps or wherever, there's this little pin that says, you are here. So grace creates this space for freedom. It creates a space for us learning a new response. And ultimately, it creates a space for learning about ourselves and learning about what acceptance means. Like I said, we've got to redefine acceptance. Acceptance doesn't mean, oh, that's okay. You know, like God's patting us on the head, say, I accept you. Don't change. No, it doesn't mean that at all. Again, motivations matter. Grace provides us with this motivation that says, look, I'm accepting you completely unequivocally. Now, it's your move. It's your move. So, we experience grace. One way we experience it is as pardon, just like Valjean did. It's an answer to our guilt. And the pardon is, you're pardoned, oftentimes said that way. Think about, for example, and I'll just add this because I forgot to do it at the very beginning, but think about all the words that have grace at its root, okay? And a lot of people don't really think through this, like gratuity. You go to the restaurant, you give somebody a gratuity, that's grace. Gratitude, accepting grace. Have you ever heard this one? A lot of people haven't. Persona non grata. You ever heard that phrase? It actually means person without grace. See, Philip Yancey once said, he said, it's the last great theological word. We experience grace as acceptance too. That's what a lot of people in my groups feel. They unmask and they're met with acceptance. As a matter of fact, oftentimes they're met with this wonderful chorus of people saying, yeah, me too. Me too. Because that's the answer to shame. I've read all of Brené Brown's stuff. She is missing the boat because the antidote and answer to shame is grace. Connection's there. I'm not debating that point with her. But it's grace because it's doing something that we won't do for ourselves. I don't think it's a matter of we can't. We just won't because we're afraid of what the consequences are. So we experience grace as power. I make a mistake. I get picked up. Somebody says, it's okay. Mistakes happen. Let's try it again. Let's do it again. And there's a certain level of power I gain toward moving toward my true self. And a lot of people say, I have no idea what that is. Yeah, I get it. That's why I spent a lot of time during my class talking about the stained glass self. Because we create an appearance for people to interact with rather than the reality. And the farther and farther away we get, the less and less we know. And we experience grace as gratitude. It gives us a sense of the actual gift that it's given to us, this lavish generosity. Oftentimes you give somebody something and you might feel it yourself. It's like, I need to do something. But do what? Even the balance? Even the scales? What about just reveling in what I've been given? I mean, I got 2 grandsons, one's 7, the other's 4. They got a treasure trove of presents during Christmas. And they didn't sit, cross-legged on the floor going, I wonder what I could do for my grandparents or my parents. No, they ripped everything open, threw it all across the entire house, unknowing where it would be afterwards. They enjoyed every minute of the things that they got. That's reveling in the grace that we're given, the gift that we're given. So grace in everyday life, grace and growth are connected. Children grow before they know anything about love or grace or anything. They grow into the context of love and grace. I often think, and I said this a few years back when I went through the promotion process and I was given the opportunity to talk, it's like, who's been my greatest teacher about grace? And oftentimes, you'd say, well, the Bible has, yeah, absolutely. Actually, one of my greatest teachers is my grandson. Because he accepts what I give him freely. Doesn't even think a thing about it. Doesn't feel guilty. Just is like, cool, let's go. This is great. It's like, yep, you're right. And the reason I say that is it gives me a glimpse of our Abba's heart toward us. It's like, I give you this. Enjoy it. Revel in it. Push it into how you relate to other people. Even better, start with yourself. And then, guess what? It will kind of come out in the relationships and stuff. It encourages growth because we accept the fact that we're limited. And not intellectually accepting is what I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about living with the limitations. We really don't like to do that. So grace allows for crockpot growth. We would much rather have microwave growth. In 30 seconds, I have a sandwich. Better yet, in a few hours, I have my character. This is like Dutch oven crockpot stuff. That takes a long time. Another part of this is grace is fundamental to learning. You look at any of the pencils that you carry around with you, there is another little object at the other end of your pencil. It is predicting that you're going to be a failure. Right? It's an eraser. We're anticipating making a mistake. Terrible. It's like, it's fine, as long as I'm the only one that knows. It encourages, grace actually encourages us to take the risk to try something new. That's why I say, if you team it up with, grace gives us the power to make the changes, to accept the realities of our limitations. It actually frees us then to try to do something new. And even if it doesn't quite work or it doesn't quite go the way we had hoped, grace is still there. It's like, okay, let's try it again. And we get frustrated before it runs out. So grace accepts that learning takes time. Like I said, failures in learning, the very fundamental definition of learning is failing. I don't know about you, and like I said, I've been talking to people a long time. I find out more when I guess wrong than when I guess right. And at times, not always, but at times, I actually guess wrong intentionally. Because when somebody corrects me, I don't do this all the time, so if you come to my office, it's like, I'm not teeing you up just to give you a hard time. But when somebody corrects me, I find out something that I could never add. I could never add it at all. And it's like, oh, that's the view that this person is operating from. Another part of this is grace and forgiveness. Henry Nouwen once said, forgiveness is grace in action. Forgiveness understands that we can expect human weakness and expect human mistakes. And understanding this level of our own forgiveness without shame. The one thing that I want to underline is when I say our own forgiveness is the forgiveness that God has given me, not your ability to forgive yourself, because you can't any more than you can save yourself. Okay? I have people say that all the time. It's like, you can't forgive yourself. You can't accept grace, which is interesting because we don't want to put it like that. I'd rather have a transaction to figure out than a gift to be accepted. And that's what we're talking about. We don't need to use the language of forgiveness. We need to use the language of grace. And that's what makes the difference. So it realizes that grace is giving away what we couldn't afford to others who can't possibly repay their offense. Henry Nouwen also adds, he defines forgiveness as love practiced amongst people that love poorly. It's living with ourselves with grace. And all the things that I said at the first hour about if you knew me the way I know me, I don't think you'd be saying that. And the worst part about it is, I probably would, but then you'd disagree and say, you're lying to me and just leave me alone. Let me rest in the comfort of my shame. So grace and forgiveness go together. If somebody hurts you or harms you in some way, and you know I'm called to forgive somebody, what exactly does that mean? It doesn't mean I'm saying what they did is fine, and they just pat them on the head, send them on their way. No. It's understanding human limits and difficulties and not getting it right and being driven by a lot of other stories that sometimes we don't even know about. And grace and self-acceptance. It's accepting the gift as given, not accepting the gift with conditions. One of the things that is really embedded in us, and we don't pay nearly enough attention to it, I think we know it. See, that's the thing about teaching in the academy and higher ed and college and everything else. We know a lot of stuff. I said to somebody, I'm a curator of a lot of ridiculous, stupid information. I love knowing things. But that doesn't necessarily make any change whatsoever in terms of how I relate to me, how I relate to others, and how I relate to God. It's just window dressing. So it cultivates the humility that's needed. Self-deprecation is not humility. It's not. Running yourself down is not humility. Humility, quite honestly, the way I put it, is humility is not something you accomplish. Humility is the byproduct of what you cultivate in your own heart about yourself. That's the difference. What are we told? You know, there's a whole list, right? And it's not the accomplishments of the Spirit, right? It's the fruit of the Spirit. How is fruit produced? Get a fruit tree, cultivate, fertilize, water, et cetera, right? And what comes out? Hopefully, if I have a peach tree, peaches. That's the fruit. When I am able to embrace the kind of grace that we're talking about and see myself in a proper context and cultivate within myself firmly who I am, I don't have to look at my grandson and say, stop being so prideful because you're my grandson. I don't have to do that. Because it's like, well, no, I'm related to him. I can walk into his office anytime I want. It's like the story, a lot of you guys may not have heard it, about Carolyn Kennedy, the daughter of John F. Kennedy. And she had a friend over to the White House, and they went rolling into the Oval Office, and the friend's going, stop, wait, we can't go in there. It's like, and she says, oh, don't worry, it's just my dad. So, committing to learning instead of knowing. And that means failures, that means things not going quite so well. The issue of grace and why we struggle with it so much is it violates our sense of justice and our commitment to punishment. We feel like we're getting off the hook, if you will, when the reality is we're getting substituted for. So when we turn things into a transaction, I'm given something, I need to return it, I need to, in like measure, give back to them or whatever. This is this retribution thing. Somebody's done something wrong, somebody has to be punished. We feel like we're getting off scot-free, right? I don't know who Scott is, but I always want, that's the craziness of my brain. It's like, where did that phrase come from? What was so special about Scott? But we think we're getting off scot-free, but the choices we make, the things that we're seeking forgiveness for, are there not consequences? But if we're going to function by perfectionism, then we can't tolerate the failure of doing anything wrong, and we will cease to learn. We just won't learn. The other thing that really annoys the socks out of us is it's free. It costs the receiver nothing, and it costs the giver everything, essentially. So, it doesn't comply with the way we see things, the way things should be. And there's that word again, right? So it's a gift. The gift is given to us to communicate our value and communicate our worth. So when the guys that I was with last night said, what is your identity? I can say my identity is in Christ. My worth is determined by God. But then I go out and I start, one of my kids gets sideways with me, and it's like, uh-oh, I got to do something. My worth stays the same. My performance changes. I don't get things right. Accepting the fact that I don't do things quite right doesn't mean I will just stop changing. Again, motivation matters. It always does. ultimately that gift reestablishes the imago Dei in us, God's image in us. It's like, this is who you are. So it offers dignity. A lot of the work that I've done over the years and talking to people that have gone through some really, really awful things. And the fact that I am there with them, allowing them to tell their story and giving them some frame to understand that story gives them dignity, because they're already tearing everything down. And so the wonder of it all really ends up being my presence is way more powerful than I think it is. And like I said, I mean, more times than not, I've said to people, look, I'm not going anywhere. And it's like, well, you better not, I'm paying you. It's like, no, I can't get paid enough to do the kinds of things I do. I'm here because even if you didn't, and then they say, of course, okay, I won't. But even if you didn't, I'd still be here. It's like, why? I have a lot of people ask me that question. It's like, what? Why? And it's like, because you're worth it. And then I watch them turn inside out. Because it's like, no. That can't be. That's just too good. It's too much of a gift, right? The other thing is, like I said, the contract. There is no quid pro quo. This for that. The heart of shame is about contracts and trades. And so what do we trade in shame? We trade our aloneness for connection and presence, but what do we trade in the process? And we live, that's the world, that's kind of our economy. And we turn a lot of things, we even turn a gift into a trade. Because our motivation is out of obligation rather than our motivation is out of love. So the heart of grace is ultimately a covenant. It's choosing another for dignity and worth and support and valuing and all of those things. And there's a conscious choice to that. That's what the covenant was. When we're told in the Old Testament that God says, I want to make a covenant with you, Abram, and because you believe me, which says something about how many people didn't, and he said, because you believe me, I want this covenant. And I will, you can't fulfill a trade with me. I'll bind myself to you. That's it, nothing else. And in Abram's time, I imagine Abram's going, scratching his head saying, yeah, there's got to be some strings here somewhere. And then the rest of his life shows that, right? So the only catch to grace is having a heart that's open to receive it. Really, that's the only catch. It's not anything new outside of that. We're always leaning in and saying, what do I owe you? So the other thing as I started the lecture was it's scandalous. It creates a stumbling block for us. The notion of God's love coming to us free of charge, no strings attached, seems to go against every instinct of humanity. Only Christianity dares to make the deity, God's love, unconditional. It's the only religion that does that, not to mention the only religion where the God actually comes to dwell with his people and takes on their form. It's the only one. So throughout the Bible, in fact, God shows a marked preference for real people over good people. Now, I put those in quotes because definitions matter, right? Real, authentic. Some of you may recognize the phrase WYSIWYG. Ever heard that before? What you see is what you get. It's real people, genuine. And God has this marked preference for that, it would appear. So there's not as much to talk about with grace because we spend very little time. I could try, which would be a fool's errand. I could try to define it till the cows come home. And there's a lot about the way that we think about grace that has a lot of yeah buts in it. Yeah, but. And the power of grace, I can't add a bunch of other stuff to it. That's why I spent a lot of time, right? I spent a good hour and 10 minutes on shame because the landscape is so full. But the landscape of grace is not real full, really. It's just what it is. And the challenge, of course, is, like I said a minute ago, or when I started, is what kind of community do you tend to create? A community of shame or a community of grace? Grace does not mean winking at sin. It doesn't mean everything's going to be okay. It doesn't mean any of those things. Quite honestly, grace always has consequences in it and limits in it. It always does, because that's the loving thing to do. So when I hear people that are in relationship or whatever it might be, and they're saying, I just want to give them grace. It's like, so what exactly do you mean by that? Because grace is not enabling bad behavior. It has nothing to do with that. As a matter of fact, the most gracious thing anyone can ever do is allow us to suffer consequences. Why? Because learning happens from consequences, not from removing them. And so it is a key element, if you will. There's a lot more from a how-to point of view, but I'd rather focus on what does it do in our lives and where do we need to move. The scandalousness of it, we can always say, yeah, I get it, I see it, etc. But then how does it show up? And shame is this powerful voice. Remember where I started. The voice of shame is you will always be what you've always been. And that whisper is underneath a lot of the things that we are fighting with off and on throughout our relationships and with other people. And when they're kind, what do we do with it and how do we accept that? But then it's God's response, as it was from Valjean. There's nothing I desire. I already paid all that there was. We know all that. But we forget to live into it. There's nothing I desire. It's no petitions, no bargains, no trades, no contracts. Just live fully as you are, as I created you to be. And let's see where that takes us. And that's harder, easier said than done, clearly. Because our tendency, even in our relationships with one another, is to correct over connect. To correct things, correct thinking, correct how somebody is living, get them to change all of those things, and we forget about connecting with them at all. And it's the relation, it's way back when Bill Clinton was running for president, and his campaign chairman said, "It's the economy, stupid." And I'd probably say it's grace. I won't insult anybody. So that's a lot of it. Hey, you guys have any questions at all before we adjourn and you can eat? And people are yawning, which says you're fading. Any questions or anything? Okay, take a break, get some food. Come back at 1 and come with some questions, and we can talk those through, which is way better than listening to me lecture. So I will see you at 1.